We have a really wonderful psalm this evening, sung beautifully as always by Julie. Thank you, Julie. And as preachers, it's very rare for us to actually comment on or talk about the psalm. So I thought I'd push us outside of our comfort zone this evening and preach about our psalm, because it is actually a really wonderful psalm. What it is it's Psalm 40, which is one of the Psalms of Thanksgiving. There's many different genres within the book of Psalms. Of course, there's 150 of them, right? And some of them are Psalms in times of tribulation, right? Calling out to God in the midst of sadness or suffering. The most famous example of this is the Psalm quoted by Christ on the cross, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? There's many different kinds of psalms, and our psalm this evening falls under the genre of a psalm of thanksgiving. This is a psalm you would sing after your tribulation. So you would complain and weep and mourn in your tribulation during those psalms, and then God would get you over the bridge, and then you'd sing a psalm of thanksgiving. So that's what we have here this evening. And these psalms are sometimes called by their Hebrew name, which is a Todah psalm. A Todah psalm is simply just a psalm of thanksgiving. And what it is simply giving thanks to God for having delivered the psalmist or the person singing the psalm from whatever difficulty they were in. And it would be matched up with a similar offering, which was called a Todah offering. In the Hebrew temple, there were all kinds of different offerings or sacrifices, and some of them, in fact, many of them, the animal or the gift being sacrificed would either be consumed or be burned, right? So if I was offering a sin offering, I would bring a bull or a goat, and the priest would slaughter it, and then they would burn it. It would be completely immolated as a sign that this bull is being offered totally to God. What is special about a Todah offering, a thanksgiving offering, is that the person giving thanks to God for some gift or deliverance would bring their gift to the temple, to the priest, either some kind of animal or grain or some kind of offering, and it would not be portioned off, it wouldn't be burnt, it would be offered to God, and then the person offering the Todah sacrifice would get the whole offering back. And then that person would then call together all their family and friends, and they would have a feast to celebrate God's deliverance from their evil. So it's the only offering where they don't actually technically offer anything to God, but they get their whole offering back, essentially as like a giant Jewish party. And I think it's a great tradition that I wish we did more of. After being saved from some evil or tribulation, just gathering all of our family and friends together and be like, hey guys, let's have a great time, right? So that's what our psalm is this evening. It's somebody in a moment of offering a Todah sacrifice, singing a Todah psalm, right? Giving thanks to God. And what's beautiful about this psalm, I think, is that you see as the psalm progresses that there's an epiphany, or there's a kind of a change of heart that happens in the psalmist himself. So it begins. It says, I have waited for the Lord, right? And here's the good news. And he stooped toward me and heard my cry. And he put a new song into my mouth, a hymn to our God, right? So here's that song. He's giving praise to God for having saved him. And then it's interesting because the psalmist seems to imply that in his prior moment of tribulation, he'd made a bargain with God, right? This is as classic as the ages, right? So this person is in some kind of suffering, and they say, Lord, if you deliver me from whatever I'm going through, I will give you an offering. I'll give you whatever you want, right? I'll give you the biggest sacrifice. And then he's saved. But he comes to a moment of epiphany. He says, sacrifice and offering you wished not, but ears open to obedience you gave me. Holocausts and sin offerings you sought not, right? God doesn't want the bull. He doesn't want the grain. He says, then said I, behold, I come, right? The psalmist is saying, Lord, you didn't actually really want the sacrifice that I promised you. You wanted me, right? You didn't save me because of what I could give to you. You saved me because you loved me. Right? This is a really common dynamic in the Christian life. I think if people recall, there was a giant boom of Catholic monks in the 1950s. And one of the theories behind this is that a bunch of young men in the trenches, either in the Pacific or out in Europe, said, dear God, if you get me out of this, I'll go to a monastery, I'll become a monk, right, whatever. And they lived, and they're like, oh, crap, I got to go to a monastery now, right? So there was a whole bunch of young men who entered monasteries in the 1950s. Many of them didn't stick around too much because, right, their heart really wasn't in it. But this is a very common thing, right? Lord, if you save me, I'll give you whatever you want, right? A very common dynamic that we can fall into as Christians is a transactional relationship with God, right? Lord, if you give me what I want, then I will give you X, right? Or if I give you what you want, then you will reward me, right? If I pray the right prayers, if I say the right novena, you'll give me Y, right? This is very common. But what the psalmist has discovered, and what he invites us into, is not a transactional way of dealing with God, but a relational way of dealing with God, right? Then said I, behold, I come. That the real offering that our Lord really wants is me, right? He saves and loves me. He doesn't want my prayers. I mean, he loves it when I pray, but the prayers aren't what he wants. He wants me, right? So there's this beautiful epiphany that the psalmist makes out of a transactional, I give you X, you give me Y, into a relational, I give you me because you give me yourself too. And it's because of this, I think, he has a parallel kind of change of mind. He says, in the written scroll, it is prescribed for me to do your will, O my God, is my delight, and your law is within my heart, right? The psalmist is saying, Lord, because I love you, and because I know that you love me, doing your will is a joy to me, right? I don't do your will because of how you can reward me or of how you can punish me if I don't do what you want, right? How many Christians there are who try to, as much as they can not to sin so that they don't go to hell, which is we don't want to go there, but there's a sense of, well, I just want to be a really good Christian just to skate in, right? If I can just get to purgatory, that's really, I just got to kind of crest over the hill, right? And that's kind of, to be honest, right? Kind of a transactional way of thinking about our lives as Christians. I just want to do as much as I can not to be punished, right? I want to follow God's law, not to be punished, but to be rewarded. It's still kind of a transactional way of dealing with God. I do X, you give me Y. And the psalmist is naming something totally different, right? He says, to do your will, O God, is my delight. He does God's will, he follows God's law, not because of some kind of external precept that rewards or punishes him, but because he loves it, right? He can recognize in God's will for him a lawgiver who loves him and who calls him to be with him forever. How often it is as Christians that we can be embarrassed about God's law, right? There are many things that the church teaches that if we're kind of honest with ourselves, right, at points we're a little embarrassed to share with others, right? The church's teachings about homosexuality or abortion or contraception, right? These kinds of things that just suck the air out of the room like that just happened about 5 seconds ago, right? We're kind of lightly embarrassed about these things. It's hard for us to say in these areas, Lord, your will is my delight, right? What you teach in this area, what the church teaches, what a delight. It just brings joy to my heart, and I want to share it with everyone, right? It's more like, well, I mean, I believe this and I accept it, but I would never force it on somebody else, right? I wouldn't tell Karen at my job, right? So there's this sense of that the Lord's law and will really isn't our delight, and I name myself in this too, right? I think the psalmist kind of calls us to a deeper conversion of heart even here, right? That if our faith really is true, if our Lord's will for us, if his law for us is really true, then it's reality, right? That which is true simply is. And reality is always good, right? For us to live in tune with reality is always a gift from God, and it's always a blessing, and it's always good. I think the psalmist really calls us to kind of a change of heart here of Lord, I really want to love your will. Obviously, I'm not going to, use it to bully other people or to tell people, you're a sinner and you're terrible and clearly I'm in the right. But we should be, hopefully, finding delight in our Lord's law and inviting people into that joy, right? People should be following God's law. People should be joining us as Christians because they see in our lives a joy. They see in following God's will for us a real delight that invites other people into that relationship with him. And it's because of that delight that our psalmist can then announce, can share this good news with others, right? He says, I announced your justice in the vast assembly. I did not restrain my lips, as you, O Lord, know, right? Coming to know God's personal love and relationship for us causes a delight, right? And a joy that cannot help but speak and to call out to others and to invite them into knowing our Lord and to following his love and his will for their lives as well. So this evening, right, as we offer a sacrifice at this altar, let's offer ourselves. Let us bring to the Lord all that we are because he desires us. And he desires us to find delight in his law, to find delight in reality, to find our joy in who he is and who we are as his beloved sons and daughters.